The lunch lady touched my tray and asked, "Are you allergic to anything?" I was halfway through the lunch line when Mrs. Kowalski touched my tray and asked the question that would destroy everything. "Are you allergic to anything, sweetheart?" I shook my head automatically because I'd been eating school lunch for 3 years without incident, and she smiled and moved my tray along. I grabbed a chocolate chip cookie from the dessert section and headed to my usual table where my best friend I can't use that name, where my best friend Devin was already eating and scrolling through his phone. I didn't think anything of the question until 4th period when Principal Gaines pulled me out of biology class. The walk to his office felt longer than usual, my sneakers squeaking on the polished hallway floors while students stared through classroom windows. Gaines closed his door and gestured to the chair across from his desk, his face arranged in that careful, neutral expression adults use when they're about to deliver bad news. "Mrs. Kowalski was taken to the hospital during 3rd period," he said slowly. "She had a severe allergic reaction to something and went into anaphylactic shock in the faculty lounge. The paramedics stabilized her, but it was close. Very close." I asked what that had to do with me, my hands gripping the armrests of the chair. Gaines pulled out a plastic evidence bag containing my lunch tray from earlier, the one Mrs. Kowalski had touched. "The school nurse found traces of peanut oil on the tray surface," he explained. "Mrs. Kowalski has a documented severe peanut allergy that's in her employee file and posted in the kitchen. Did you bring anything from home today that might have contained peanuts?" My backpack sat on the floor next to my chair, and I mentally inventoried everything inside it. Protein bar from this morning, peanut butter flavor. I'd eaten it on the bus and tossed the wrapper in the cafeteria trash before getting in line. The realization must have shown on my face because Gaines leaned forward. "The wrapper was recovered from the trash with your name on your morning assignment visible in your backpack pocket," he continued. "Residue from the protein bar must have transferred to your hands, then to the tray when you picked it up. When Mrs. Kowalski touched the same spot, she absorbed enough peanut protein through skin contact to trigger a reaction." I started to say that I'd washed my hands after eating, but then I remembered I hadn't. I'd been running late after the bus broke down and had gone straight to 1st period. My stomach dropped. Gaines explained that I wasn't in trouble. It was an accident, but the school board would need to investigate. Mrs. Kowalski's family was already talking about liability and negligence. The school's insurance company would be involved. I should tell my parents what happened before they heard it from someone else. He stood up, signaling the conversation was over, and I walked back to class in a daze. By the time the final bell rang, everyone knew. Devin met me at my locker with his phone out, showing me the group chat where someone had posted that Mrs. Kowalski almost died because of something I did. The messages were escalating fast. Kids I barely knew calling me careless and dangerous. One girl wrote that I should have been more careful around someone with allergies. Another said I was basically a murderer. I tried to explain about the protein bar and the unwashed hands, but Devin just looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before, like he was seeing me differently now. My mom picked me up instead of making me take the bus, her jaw tight as she drove. The school had called her an hour ago with the basic facts, and she'd left work early. We rode in silence until she pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine. Then she asked me to walk her through exactly what happened, step by step. No details left out. I told her about the protein bar, about not washing my hands, about Mrs. Kowalski asking if I was allergic to anything. Mom's hands gripped the steering wheel hard enough that her knuckles went white. She asked why I hadn't washed my hands, and I said I'd been running late and forgot. She closed her eyes and took 3 long breaths before opening her door. Inside the house, my little sister Zoe was doing homework at the kitchen table, and Mom told her to go to her room. Zoe looked between us with worried eyes before gathering her books and disappearing upstairs. That evening, my dad got home from his construction job, and Mom filled him in while I sat at the kitchen table feeling like I was on trial. Dad listened without interrupting, his work boots leaving dirt smudges on the floor Mom usually yelled about. When she finished, he asked me the same question she had. "Why didn't you wash your hands?" I explained again about the bus, about being late, about rushing. Dad said that wasn't good enough. A woman almost died because I couldn't take 30 seconds to wash my hands. Did I understand how serious this was? I nodded, throat too tight to speak. He said we'd be hearing from lawyers probably, that the school might try to shift blame to us, that this could cost us everything if Mrs. Kowalski's family decided to sue. Mom started crying quietly, which made everything feel worse. I'd seen her cry maybe 3 times in my entire life. Dad put his hand on her shoulder and told me to go to my room while they figured out what to do next. I lay on my bed staring at my phone as the notifications piled up. Someone had created an Instagram account called Riverside Danger Watch and posted my school photo with text overlay. "This student sent a teacher to the hospital. Stay safe, Riverside." The account had 50 followers in the first hour. Someone else had edited my yearbook picture to add devil horns and posted it with the caption, "Attempted murderer walks among us." The comments ranged from people calling me an idiot to people saying I should be expelled. A few defended me, saying it was an accident, but they were drowned out by the mob. Devin texted asking if I was okay, which was decent of him, but I could tell from his message tone that he was keeping his distance now. I turned off my phone and tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mrs. Kowalski's hand touching my tray and wondered if she'd survive whatever came next. The next morning, I woke up to my mom telling me I wasn't going to school. The principal had called and recommended I stay home while they conducted their investigation and worked with Mrs. Kowalski's family. They'd send my assignments via email. Mom's voice had this hollow quality, like she'd been up all night worrying. Downstairs, Dad was on the phone with someone about lawyers, his voice tense. I heard him mention the phrase liability insurance 3 times before he noticed me and waved me away. I went back upstairs and opened my laptop to check email. There were already 2 assignments from teachers with deadlines, as if life was just continuing normally for everyone else while mine had imploded. I tried to focus on reading about the French Revolution for history class, but my brain kept circling back to the lunch line and that moment when Mrs. Kowalski touched my tray. By noon, the local news had picked up the story. Devin sent me a link to an article titled, "Teacher Hospitalized After Allergic Reaction at Riverside Academy." The article didn't name me, I was a minor, but it had enough details that anyone at school could figure it out. It mentioned a student bringing a peanut product to school and failing to follow basic hygiene protocols, resulting in life-threatening contamination. It quoted Riverside's principal saying they were reviewing their allergy policies and taking the incident very seriously. Mrs. Kowalski's daughter had given a statement about her mother fighting for her life in ICU and how this could have been prevented with basic awareness and responsibility. The comments section was toxic. People saying kids today were careless and entitled, that parents weren't teaching responsibility, that the student should face criminal charges. One comment with 200 likes said I should be sued for every penny my family had. That afternoon, a lawyer named Gregory Brennan came to our house. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, wearing a suit that looked expensive. He sat at our kitchen table with a legal pad and asked me the same questions everyone else had. What did you eat? When? Did you wash your hands? Walk me through the lunch line interaction. I answered everything while he took notes in neat handwriting. When I finished, he sat back and tapped his pen against his pad. The good news was that I clearly hadn't intended harm. This was negligence at worst, not assault. The bad news was that negligence was still actionable, and Mrs. Kowalski's medical bills would be substantial. ICU care, follow-up treatments, lost wages from missing work. We could be looking at 6 figures if her family pursued maximum damages. Dad's face went gray. We didn't have that kind of money. We barely had savings. Brennan said that's what insurance was for, but he'd need to review our homeowner's policy to see what liability coverage we carried. 3 days later, Mrs. Kowalski's family filed a lawsuit, not just against me, but against my parents, the school district, and the food service company that supplied the cafeteria. The complaint alleged negligence, failure to maintain a safe environment, and inadequate allergy protocols. Brennan walked us through the legal document, explaining each count and what it meant. The family was seeking $500,000 in damages plus punitive penalties. They argued that Riverside Academy had failed to properly train students on allergy awareness, despite having multiple staff members with documented severe allergies. They argued the cafeteria should have had hand-washing stations at the entrance. They argued my parents had failed to teach me basic hygiene and safety awareness. The complaint made me sound like a careless monster who'd recklessly endangered someone's life. Reading it made my hands shake. Brennan said we'd be filing a response denying negligence and asserting that this was an unforeseeable accident, but he warned us to prepare for a long fight. School became impossible. I'd been back for 1 day when someone poured milk down my backpack vents between classes. The paper inside was ruined, my homework destroyed. When I reported it, the vice principal said she'd look into it but couldn't promise anything without witnesses. At lunch, no one would sit near me. Devin tried, but his other friends pulled him away, saying they didn't want to be associated with the Peanut Kid. That nickname spread fast. By the end of the week, someone had printed peanut warning labels and taped them to my locker. People would fake allergic reactions when I walked past, clutching their throats and gasping dramatically, then laugh at their own jokes. Teachers pretended not to notice, or maybe they genuinely didn't see it happening. I started eating lunch in the library where the librarian let me hide at a back table with my food in a bag from home. No more cafeteria trays. No more taking chances. My parents hired a second lawyer, Juliet Fernandez, who specialized in education law. She was in her 50s with steel gray hair and a no-nonsense attitude that made me feel slightly less terrified. She reviewed the school's allergy policy documents and found inconsistencies in how they were enforced. Some teachers had students wash hands before class, others didn't. The cafeteria had signs about allergies, but they were small and easy to miss. There was no mandatory training for students about cross-contamination or how to protect classmates with severe allergies. Fernandez said the school had been negligent in creating an environment where an incident like this could occur. If Mrs. Kowalski's family wanted to sue someone, they should sue the institution that employed her and failed to implement adequate safety protocols. She started preparing a countersuit that would shift liability from my family to Riverside Academy's administration. Mrs. Kowalski came out of ICU after 2 weeks. The local news covered her homecoming with footage of her daughter helping her into the house, Mrs. Kowalski looking pale and weak. The reporter interviewed the daughter on their front porch. She said her mother had been lucky to survive, that another few minutes could have been fatal. She looked directly at the camera and said the family wanted accountability, not just apologies, but real consequences for the people responsible for this preventable tragedy. That night, someone threw a rock through our living room window. It landed on the couch where my sister had been sitting 20 minutes earlier. Dad called the police, who took a report and said they'd increase patrols in our neighborhood. They asked if we had any enemies or knew who might have done this. Dad just laughed bitterly and said to check social media. Half the town wanted us gone. The officer looked uncomfortable and said vandalism was a serious crime, but without witnesses or evidence, there wasn't much they could do. We taped cardboard over the broken window, and my parents started talking about moving. The depositions started in October. I had to sit in a conference room with lawyers from all sides asking me questions for 4 hours. Mrs. Kowalski's attorney was a shark named Leonard Voss, who made every question sound like an accusation. Had I ever received allergy training at school? Had my parents taught me about cross-contamination? Did I regularly wash my hands before lunch? Did I read nutrition labels? Did I understand that my actions had consequences? Brennan objected constantly, but I still had to answer. I explained that no one had ever taught me about allergy risks specifically. My parents had taught me to wash my hands before eating, but I'd been running late that day. I didn't think about protein bar residue because I'd never been told it could be dangerous. Voss made everything sound like an excuse. He submitted my social media posts into evidence. Photos of me eating peanut butter snacks, jokes about food allergies being overblown, comments I'd made on posts that I didn't even remember. He painted me as someone who was willfully ignorant and dangerously careless. Mrs. Kowalski testified via video conference because she wasn't strong enough to come in person. She looked fragile on the monitor, her voice weak as she described working in the cafeteria for 12 years without incident. She'd always been careful about her allergy, wore a medical bracelet, carried an EpiPen, informed all her co-workers and supervisors. She'd asked me about my allergies because she'd noticed residue on my tray and wanted to protect me, not knowing the residue was the very thing that could kill her. Her voice broke when she described the moment her throat started closing in the faculty lounge, the panic as her co-workers scrambled to find her EpiPen, the sensation of suffocating while conscious. She'd thought she was going to die. Even now, weeks later, she had breathing problems and constant anxiety about exposure. She couldn't work anymore, couldn't go out in public without fear. Her life had been destroyed by one moment of contact with peanut residue on a lunch tray. By the time her testimony ended, 2 people in the conference room were crying. I sat there feeling like the worst person alive. My mom's deposition was harder to watch. Voss grilled her about parenting choices. Had she taught me proper hygiene? Did she monitor what I ate? Why hadn't she made sure I understood allergy risks? Mom kept her composure, but I could see her hands trembling as she answered. She said she'd taught me to wash my hands and be considerate of others, but no one had ever told her that schools required specific allergy education for students. She'd assumed the school handled that. Voss produced emails between parents and the PTA discussing allergy policies, implying that Mom should have been involved and informed. He asked if she'd attended back-to-school nights where policies were discussed. Mom admitted she'd missed a few due to work schedule conflicts. Voss made it sound like she was a negligent parent who prioritized work over her child's education. Brennan objected repeatedly, but the damage was done. Dad's deposition was shorter, but equally brutal. Voss questioned whether my parents had proper supervision of my diet, whether they'd taught me responsibility, whether they'd failed in their duty to raise an aware and careful child. The school district tried to settle quietly. Their lawyers offered to pay Mrs. Kowalski's medical bills and lost wages in exchange for dropping the suit against them. Fernandez told us that the offer proved they knew they were liable. Schools had a duty to provide safe environments and proper education about health risks, but Mrs. Kowalski's family rejected the offer. They wanted more than money. They wanted reforms. They wanted my parents and me to face consequences. They wanted everyone to understand that allergies weren't a joke and carelessness had costs. Voss released a statement to the press saying his clients wouldn't accept a settlement that let people off easy when a life had nearly been lost. The story ran in the local paper with quotes from allergy advocacy groups praising the family's stance. I was still unnamed officially, but everyone at school knew. Someone started a petition to expel me for endangering the student body. It got 800 signatures before the principal took it down. Things got worse when the school board held a public meeting about allergy policies. My parents attended, sitting in the back row while parents stood at the microphone to give comments. One by one, people talked about the importance of protecting children with allergies, about the need for strict rules and consequences. Some spoke directly about the incident without naming me, calling it a wake-up call about how one careless student could destroy lives. A few parents said students should face criminal charges for allergy-related negligence, that it should be treated like reckless endangerment. The board members nodded along, taking notes. Only 2 people spoke in defense of treating the situation as the accident it was. One was a teacher who pointed out that the school had never provided formal allergy training to students. The other was a parent whose child had a different medical condition, who talked about how fear-based policies could create toxic environments. Both were largely ignored. The board voted to implement new policies, mandatory allergy awareness assemblies, hand-washing stations at every cafeteria entrance, designated allergen-free zones, and a 3-strike policy for students who violated protocols. I'd be the test case. Brennan filed a motion to dismiss the case against my family, arguing that we weren't liable for the school's failure to educate and protect. Fernandez filed a counterclaim against Riverside Academy for failing to implement adequate safety protocols and putting students in positions where accidents could occur. The judge denied both motions. She said there were genuine issues of material fact that needed to go to trial, whether the school had been negligent, whether my parents had been negligent, whether I had been negligent. All three parties shared potential responsibility. The trial was set for March, 6 months away. 6 months of living in limbo, waiting to find out if my family would be destroyed financially. Dad's insurance company agreed to cover legal costs, but capped damages at $300,000. If the jury awarded more, we'd be personally liable for the difference. That meant potentially losing our house, our savings, everything. Dad started working double shifts. Mom took a weekend job. We stopped eating out, stopped buying anything non-essential. Zoe asked why Christmas might be smaller this year, and Mom just hugged her without explaining. I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Amanda Roth, who specialized in trauma and anxiety. She had an office with plants and soft lighting that was supposed to be calming, but I spent most of our first session crying. She let me, then asked what I was feeling beyond the obvious guilt and fear. I told her I felt like I'd destroyed everything: Mrs. Kowalski's life, my family's finances, my parents' trust in me. She asked if I'd intended any of that. I said of course not. She said intention mattered. I'd made a mistake, not a choice. The difference was important. I argued that the result was the same either way. She said results and responsibility were different things. Over the following weeks, she taught me cognitive exercises for when the guilt spiraled. We talked about how one mistake didn't define me, how people were more than their worst moments. She gave me homework, writing letters I'd never send, to Mrs. Kowalski, to my parents, to myself. The letters to Mrs. Kowalski always started with, "I'm sorry," and ended with more apologies. Dr. Roth said that was normal, but not helpful. Apologies needed to lead somewhere, to growth or change. I asked what I was supposed to change. She said maybe I needed to forgive myself first. Devin eventually came back around, though our friendship was different now. He'd sit with me at lunch in the library, but he'd check over his shoulder like he was worried about being seen. He told me that other kids thought I'd gotten away with something, that I should have been expelled or arrested. A rumor had spread that my family was rich and had bought my way out of consequences with expensive lawyers. In reality, my parents were maxing out credit cards to pay Brennan and Fernandez. Devin asked if I was going to be okay, and I told him the truth. I didn't know. The trial would determine everything. He said that sucked, which was both obvious and somehow comforting in its honesty. He showed me posts from kids at school who were running fundraisers for Mrs. Kowalski's medical costs. One group had raised $5,000 selling baked goods. Another had organized a 5K run. Meanwhile, my family was being portrayed as villains who were fighting to avoid responsibility. The narrative had been set, and no amount of truth could change it. In January, the school board voted to ban all peanut products from campus. Not just the cafeteria, but packed lunches, vending machines, everything. Students whose families sent them with peanut butter sandwiches had their lunches confiscated. Kids with peanut allergies in lower grades got special lanyards and were assigned buddy monitors to make sure they stayed safe. The new policies were named Kowalski's Rules, after Mrs. Kowalski, which made me feel like I was being erased and memorialized at the same time. Fernandez said the policies proved the school knew they'd been negligent before. If these measures were necessary now, they should have been in place earlier. Riverside's lawyers countered that the policies were preventative measures, not admissions of prior failure. The legal arguments felt abstract compared to the daily reality of living as the reason everything had changed. Teachers enforced the new rules strictly. Students who forgot and brought banned items faced detention. Some parents complained about government overreach and personal choice. Others praised the protections. I stayed invisible in the middle, the cautionary tale nobody wanted to talk to directly. Mrs. Kowalski's daughter appeared on local news again in February, giving an interview about her mother's recovery. She said her mom was doing better physically, but struggled emotionally. She had PTSD from the incident and severe anxiety about going anywhere food might be present. She'd lost her job. The school district had let her go because she couldn't return to work in the cafeteria environment that had nearly killed her. The family was relying on savings and the fundraisers organized by community members. The daughter looked into the camera and said they were preparing for trial, hoping for justice, wanting people to understand that carelessness had real victims. She held up a photo of her mom before the incident, smiling, healthy, holding a grandchild. Then she held up a recent photo, thin, tired, scared. The difference was stark. The daughter said one student's failure to wash his hands had done this. She didn't need to name me. Everyone knew. After the interview aired, someone spray-painted "Peanut Killer" on our garage door in red paint. Dad scrubbed it off before dawn so Zoe wouldn't see it. The trial began on a cold Monday in March. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, with fluorescent lights and a tired-looking American flag in the corner. The jury was 12 people who'd promised they could be impartial despite the media coverage. Mrs. Kowalski's side went first. Voss laid out the case methodically. A lunch lady with a known severe allergy, a careless teenager who brought an allergenic food to school and failed to follow basic hygiene, contamination that led to anaphylaxis and lasting trauma. He showed medical records, bills totaling $150,000, expert testimony from an allergist about how peanut protein could be transferred through touch and cause severe reactions. He showed the jury photos of Mrs. Kowalski in the hospital, intubated and fighting for her life. He called her daughter to testify about watching her mother nearly die and dealing with the aftermath. The daughter cried on the stand describing the phone call from the hospital, racing there expecting the worst, watching her mother struggle to breathe even with medical intervention. She looked at me once during her testimony with such hatred that I had to look away. Mrs. Kowalski testified in person this time, though she looked like the effort cost her. She was thinner than in the video deposition, her hands shaking as she took the oath. She described her 12 years working at Riverside Academy, feeding students, learning their names, watching them grow. She'd loved that job despite the low pay and long hours. She'd been careful about her allergy, always, wearing her medical bracelet and carrying her EpiPen and informing everyone who worked with her. That day in October, she'd been doing routine inspections of trays for cleanliness when she'd touched mine. She'd seen something that looked like a smudge and had wanted to ask if I had allergies so she could help me be safe. That kindness had nearly killed her. Within minutes of touching the tray, her hands had started itching. Then her throat closed. She'd used her EpiPen immediately, but the reaction was too severe. She'd lost consciousness in the faculty lounge and woken up in the ICU 3 days later. Now she couldn't work, couldn't be around food service environments, had panic attacks in grocery stores. Her life had been destroyed by 30 seconds of contact with peanut residue that shouldn't have been there. Brennan's defense focused on the school's failures. He called expert witnesses who testified that Riverside Academy had inadequate allergy protocols, no student education programs about cross-contamination, insufficient hand-washing facilities, and poor staff training. He showed documentation of previous minor allergic reactions that had been ignored or downplayed by administration. He called teachers who admitted they'd never been trained on how to protect students and staff with allergies. He called the cafeteria manager who acknowledged that staff didn't regularly clean tray surfaces between lunch periods. He called a parent who'd complained to the school board 3 years earlier about allergy risks and been dismissed. He built a case that the institution had created an unsafe environment through negligence and willful ignorance. My parents testified briefly, describing how they'd taught me hygiene and responsibility, but had no idea the school lacked allergy education. I'd been following the same protocols everyone else followed because no one had told us the protocols were insufficient. Brennan argued that blaming a teenager for an institutional failure was unjust. Fernandez went further, arguing that the school district had violated its duty of care to both students and employees. She presented emails between administrators discussing allergy concerns and choosing not to implement changes due to budget constraints. She showed evidence that the school board had been warned multiple times about the risks and had done nothing. She called a former school nurse who'd resigned in frustration after her recommendations for allergy protocols were ignored. She demonstrated that Riverside Academy had prioritized cost savings over safety, creating exactly the situation where an incident like this could occur. She argued that Mrs. Kowalski should be suing the institution that employed her and failed to protect her, not the family of a student who'd been set up to fail by inadequate education and oversight. The school district's lawyer objected constantly, but Fernandez had documentation for everything. By the time she rested, she'd made it clear that the school board knew they were liable, which was why they'd tried to settle early. They'd hoped to avoid trial because they knew what discovery would reveal. I testified on a Thursday morning, wearing a suit my mom had borrowed from a neighbor because we couldn't afford to buy one. Brennan had prepared me for days, practicing questions and answers, coaching me on how to stay calm and honest. But sitting in that witness box with 12 jurors staring at me and Mrs. Kowalski crying in the front row made everything he'd taught me evaporate. Voss started gentle, asking basic questions about my day, my routine, what I'd eaten for breakfast. Then he shifted. Why had I chosen a peanut butter protein bar when I knew peanuts were a common allergen? I said I didn't think about it. It was just breakfast. He asked if I'd seen the allergy warnings posted in the cafeteria. I said I'd probably seen them but didn't read them carefully because I didn't have allergies. He asked if I'd been taught to wash my hands before lunch. I said yes, but I'd been running late and forgotten. He made forgotten sound like a crime. He asked if I understood that my forgetfulness had nearly killed someone. Brennan objected, but I'd already started crying. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Brennan said that was good. It meant they were taking time to consider everything, not rushing to judgment. Fernandez said it could go either way. We waited in a conference room down the hall from the courtroom, my parents holding hands and barely speaking. Zoe was staying with our aunt, spared from watching this final chapter. When the jury came back, we filed into the courtroom and I tried to read their faces. The forewoman stood and read the verdict. The jury found that Riverside Academy bore 70% responsibility for the incident due to inadequate safety protocols and failure to educate students. My family bore 20% responsibility for my actions the day of the incident. Mrs. Kowalski bore 10% responsibility for touching the tray, despite knowing her severe allergy, though this was mitigated by her job requirements. The jury awarded Mrs. Kowalski $200,000 in damages to be paid proportionally by each liable party. My family's portion was $40,000. The school district owed $140,000. Mrs. Kowalski owed nothing because her comparative fault was outweighed by the others. $40,000 might as well have been $1 million. We didn't have it. Brennan negotiated a payment plan, $500 per month for 7 years, interest-free, with a provision that if we missed 2 consecutive payments, the full amount would be due immediately. My parents took out a home equity loan to cover the first year and borrowed from my dad's 401k for the second. They'd be paying this debt until I graduated college, if I went to college, which seemed unlikely now since we couldn't afford it. The school district was ordered to implement comprehensive allergy safety programs and hire a full-time health coordinator. They were also required to pay Mrs. Kowalski's ongoing medical costs. Voss called the verdict a partial victory for accountability in a press statement. Fernandez called it recognition that systemic failures hurt everyone. Brennan said we'd survived, which would have to be enough. I called it the end of my childhood, the moment everything innocent about being 17 died in a courthouse under fluorescent lights. Mrs. Kowalski's daughter stopped me outside the courthouse. My parents tensed, ready to intervene, but she held up a hand. She said her mom wanted me to know she didn't hate me. She understood I was a kid who'd made a mistake, but the mistake had consequences that would follow both our families forever. She hoped I'd learn from this, that I'd become someone who understood how one moment of carelessness could destroy lives. Then she walked away, leaving me standing there with my parents on the courthouse steps while news cameras filmed from across the street. That footage appeared on the evening news with commentary about the case's implications. Legal experts debated shared responsibility and institutional liability. Allergy advocates praised the verdict as setting precedent. Critics said it didn't go far enough. No one asked me what it felt like to be 17 years old and drowning in debt and guilt that would never fully go away. I graduated from Riverside Academy on a sunny Saturday in May. My name was called, and I walked across the stage while a handful of people applauded politely and most sat in silence. No one threw their cap at me or cheered. Devin was one of the few who clapped, along with my family and Dr. Roth, who'd come to support me. After the ceremony, we took photos in our yard instead of at the school because I couldn't handle being there anymore. That fall, I started community college, paying for classes with loans and working 20 hours a week at a warehouse. My parents were still making monthly payments to Mrs. Kowalski, and I'd started contributing once I turned 18. Dr. Roth said I was taking on adult burdens too soon, but I couldn't let my parents carry this alone. 3 years later, Mrs. Kowalski passed away from heart complications her doctor said were likely linked to the trauma her body endured during the anaphylaxis. Her family sent a letter to my parents saying they didn't blame us for her death, but I carried that weight anyway, adding it to the pile I'd been carrying since October of my junior year. 10 years after the incident, I became a lawyer specializing in institutional liability and food safety regulations. I help schools and hospitals implement allergy protocols that actually protect people. I give lectures about systemic failures and how one preventable accident taught me that individual responsibility and institutional accountability aren't separate. They're connected threads in the same failing safety net. Mrs. Kowalski's daughter and I exchange emails sometimes, brief check-ins about our lives and the ways we've tried to build meaning from tragedy. The $40,000 debt was paid off last year, but the lesson costs continue. Every time I see a kid rushing through a cafeteria line or skipping a hand-washing station, I think about how easy it is to forget that other people's lives might depend on the small choices we don't even notice we're making. I still carry Dr. Roth's words with me. Intention matters, but so does impact, and learning to live with both is the work of a lifetime. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.